Undercover boss orders eggs at local diner freezes when cook breaks into tears. The sound of hot oil began to crackle in the deep, black iron skillet.
Steam rose from the sizzling bacon, blending with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, creating the unmistakable aroma of a busy morning at Riverbend Diner, a long-standing roadside restaurant on the edge of Highway 12 in the suburbs of Grand Falls.
At a small table near the old honeycomb stone wall, Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of the Sunrise Calf chain, sat alone. Today, no suit, no entourage. Just a pale blue plaid shirt, a khaki jacket, an old leather notebook, and eyes quietly observing every movement behind the counter. He ordered his usual over-easy eggs, a slice of charred toast, black coffee with no sugar like any regular customer. The waitress just assumed he was a familiar traveler stopping by on his way back from a work trip. No one knew that the man sipping coffee was the owner of a multi-million-dollar calf empire, and he was here to listen, to see, and to understand what was really happening behind the OPAN sign at 6 a.m. every day. The atmosphere inside the diner buzzed just enough. The espresso machine hummed. Staff brushed past each other, exchanging light jokes. A normal morning, seemingly without any trouble, until a small sound cut through it all. Not the clink of plates. Not a customer calling out an order, but a sob, a stifled, urgent sob coming from the kitchen. Michael frowned. He set his cup down. Through the cracked kitchen door, he saw a middle-aged man, his dark chef's coat, faded, his back hunched, standing motionless in front of the stove. The eggs in the pan were half-cooked, oil splattering on his hand, but he didn't flinch. Then suddenly the man dropped the pan onto the counter. Both hands braced on the surface, shoulders shaking.
And then he wept.
Not loudly, but enough for Michael, even from outside, to feel the pain hidden in the heat of that tiny kitchen. A female kitchen assistant walked in. She didn't ask anything. Just glanced and turned away as if this wasn't the first time they'd seen it happen. Michael heard a quiet sentence, just enough to make his chest feel heavy. He was denied his paycheck last week. Reason given was lack of positive energy. Moments later, the sound of a metal spoon hitting the floor. The man wiped his face with a kitchen towel, then returned to work like nothing had happened. Eggs still flipped toast, still charred coffee, still smelled rich, but Michael couldn't take another sip. A head chef, the backbone of breakfast, why did he have to swallow his tears behind a steel door? Had the very system Michael once took pride in forgotten someone hidden in a dim corner of the kitchen, a dignified man cooking with trembling hands? A founder sitting there witnessing what no internal report ever records. And a witness you joining him on a journey no one expected to begin with, just a plate of over-easy eggs. Greenville, Ohio. 7:22 a.m. Spring skies still dusted with dew and the first light of the day piercing through the dusty window panes of Sunnyside Diner, a small eatery tucked at the corner of 5th Street and Main Avenue, where most truckers, factory workers, and elementary school teachers stop before their shifts. Old red brick walls menu, handwritten in white chalk on a blackboard. Familiar sounds, glass cups, clinking spoons, tapping gently on ceramic plates, orders being called steadily from behind the counter. It all painted a scene of warmth and familiarity, a peaceful slice of America. But walk past the slightly ajar kitchen door and everything changed. Their sunny side diner was no longer the sunny morning its name promised. It was a narrow room, dimly lit, with oil-stained walls, aged by time. No conversation. No laughter. Only the sounds of chopping knives, sputtering gas stoves, and a silence that lingered like a thin layer of smoke, coating everyone standing at the line. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder of Sunrise Calf, was on a routine inspection of franchise branches across the Midwest. But unlike before this time, he gave no notice. He wore a simple disguise, plaid shirt, jeans, a faded baseball cap, and brown leather shoes. Michael didn't want to meet with the manager. He didn't want to hear reports from accounting. He wanted to see with his eyes, hear with his ears, and feel with the instincts of someone who once waited tables himself. Jesse, the head cook, about 45 years old, tall, broad-shouldered hair already graying, his face etched with time and something deeper, sadder, something a man only carries after losing a large part of his life. Jesse didn't talk much. Every move he made, chopping onions, flipping eggs, plating meals, was precise like clockwork but lifeless. Each time he turned away from the customers, his shoulders sagged as if bearing a weight no one else could see. No one at the diner ever touched Jesse. But everyone whispered the same thing: Jesse shouldn't have come back to work after what happened with his son. Michael heard that sentence 3 times from 3 different customers within the first 15 minutes. Kara, the waitress, probably around 23 years old, her uniform neatly pressed, brown hair tied high. To the customers, Kara was always smiling, polite, just like every manager expects. But Michael, whose eyes had seen thousands of silent conversations in cafes, noticed the emptiness in hers the moment she handed him his coffee. There was a small moment, no one noticed it, but Michael did. Kara walked into the kitchen, gently placed a muffin wrapped in a napkin on the counter next to Jesse, then softly said, "I'll just leave this here. Okay, no need to say anything." Jesse didn't look up. He just nodded slightly and used one hand to pull the muffin toward himself like a habit too familiar to question.
Subtle clue when a regular customer tried to leave a tip for Jesse. He shook his head. Just leave it on the table.
The manager will split it like always. His voice was steady, but behind it lay a layer of helplessness and quiet resignation that words could never fully express. A couple sitting in the corner whispered to each other, "Should we message the diner's fan page or something? Jesse doesn't deserve this." When the order printer jammed, a staff member called out for Sandra, the manager, but she just shrugged, let Jesse handle it. He never complains anyway. Jesse carried the entire kitchen, yet wasn't allowed to receive tips directly.
Kara, clearly someone who had enough of her own worries, still tried to help Jesse by secretly giving him a breakfast portion.
Everyone seemed to know something was wrong, but no one said a word. And that's when Michael realized he wasn't just observing a diner, but an entire silent ecosystem where wounds were hidden beneath kitchen smoke and polite smiles. The wall clock ticked gently 3 times. 8:15 a.m. Michael remained seated, half a cup of coffee now cold. He hadn't written anything in his notebook for a while. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the curtain separating the dining area from the kitchen, where Jesse was quietly wiping down the stove with a worn-out cloth. That was when he heard a conversation not meant for outside ears. But in the stillness of that room, every small sound rang clear like a bell. He still owes hospital bills, and last month he didn't even get a paycheck. Another voice, deeper tinged with quiet resignation, Miss Sandra said his pay is on hold, still verifying hours. Something about a shift mismatch. Michael looked up, frozen for a few seconds. His back leaned slightly forward. His hand gripped the pen tighter, like trying to carve every word he'd just heard into memory. Kara, the young waitress, was pouring coffee for a customer when someone asked that guy who cooks he still runs here every day. Why not drive? Kara smiled faintly, but her eyes lowered. He sold his car. Used the money to pay for his son's heart surgery, but in the end, the hospital refused the operation because the payment was late. The customer went silent. Kara continued pouring coffee, but her motions were slower now. Michael closed his eyes. He knew that feeling, that crushing helplessness when money decides who lives and who waits. One of the kitchen assistants recounted, perhaps just speaking to himself, Jesse tried to ask for a night shift. Needed the money? No. But Sandra said no. Said head chefs aren't allowed to work overtime. Even though we were short that night, Michael flipped his notebook, quickly scribbling a single line: denied OT policy or control. Then he looked up. His expression had already started to shift from an observer to someone about to act. Jesse was washing a pan. The water had stopped running. Only his breathing remained steady, deliberate, trying to stay calm. He took from his wallet an old, wrinkled photograph, its edges faded. In the picture, a boy around 8 years old, smiling brightly in a schoolyard, holding up a Student of the Month certificate. Jesse stared at it for a few seconds, his lips pressed together. He said nothing. Then he gently folded the photo, tucked it back into his wallet, as if hiding something no one else was meant to see. But Michael had seen everything, and now so had the audience. This was no longer just a story about breakfast. Michael stood up.
Slowly walked away from the table.
Coffee cup in hand, he moved through the narrow path between diners. No one paid attention to him, just a plain-looking man in his 50s like any regular. But but his eyes' sharp calm were capturing every detail. He stopped near the dishwashing station. A girl with curly hair around 19 was drying cups with a worn-out towel. Michael smiled. "You work morning shifts too, is the scheduling fair here?" She paused, looked around, then answered in a low voice like she was afraid someone might hear whoever gets along with Mez. "Sandra gets hours. If not, you wait till next week for her evaluation." Michael gave a small nod, thanked her, but he didn't walk away. He asked again naturally, the cook Jesse right, as he'd been working here long. The girl lowered her head, voice growing softer. "He's the only one who stays late every single day. But for weeks now, his paycheck's been off." Michael continued toward the back of the kitchen where Kara was placing bread into trays. He leaned in and asked gently, "Was Jesse okay this morning? I noticed he seemed quiet." Kara exhaled, eyes still on the bread. "He probably hasn't quit yet because he still has insurance for his kid. His son needs monthly checkups." She glanced toward the kitchen where Jesse was silently wiping a frying pan. "Here, it's not unusual for someone to cry in the kitchen." Michael tightened his grip around the coffee cup. His eyes slowly turned toward that same corner. A few minutes later, as the crowd thinned, Jesse stepped out of the main kitchen. He sat on a low stool near the spice rack. In his hands, a leftover pancake, cold now with some syrup clinging to the rim of the plate. Clearly a customer's unfinished portion. No knife. No fork. He broke a corner of the pancake by hand, dipped it into the syrup, and ate slowly, quietly, as if that was the only way he could eat during a shift without being called lazy or taking unauthorized breaks. Michael witnessed it all. He didn't look away. A part of him wanted to step forward to place a hand on Jesse's shoulder, but he couldn't, not yet. An older janitor quietly pulled Michael aside as he stood near the refill station. "You new here. Don't be surprised Jesse's so quiet. A few weeks ago, he passed out mid-shift. But Sandra wouldn't let him leave. Said we were short-staffed." Michael froze. He took time off after that, but came back just for the health insurance for his son. Sandra glanced toward the kitchen from a distance, then spoke into the staff walkie-talkie. "Keep an eye on Jesse. It looks weird if he sits too long." As if a chef sitting down for 5 minutes to eat leftover food was somehow inappropriate. On the shift schedule board, Jesse's name was circled twice. One circle read, "Pending approval." The other, "Payroll hold." Michael captured the image with a hidden camera sewn into his shirt button. A small handwritten note, secretly taped behind the fridge shift priority: "Smile first, speak last." Michael returned to his table, but this time not to continue eating. He sat down, opened his notebook, and wrote only one line: "Silent, but something is breaking." Then he looked around a cozy breakfast diner. Laughter echoed from customers. But behind the scenes, a system that left people swallowing tears along with cold pancakes. The late morning sunlight pierced through the dusty window glass, falling onto the old tiled floor where Michael was now standing up. The wooden chair scraped softly, a small sound, but in his mind it rang like a whistle. It was time. He walked toward the kitchen counter, not in a rush, but with the steady steps of someone who had seen enough to begin asking. Jesse was alone behind the oven, holding a worn-out wire brush, scrubbing repeatedly at the burnt marks on a cast-iron grate. Each stroke was even, but as Michael stepped closer, he could clearly see those hands were trembling. "You all right?" Michael asked, his voice just low enough not to startle Jesse. Jesse looked up. His face had been wiped free of sweat, but his eyes were still wet. He tried to force a smile, crooked like a cracked mirror. "Thanks. I was just thinking about my son. He's having a second surgery soon, but I'm not even sure if I can get time off." Michael didn't respond. He simply nodded slightly, placing one hand on the cold stainless steel counter. His eyes softened, but inside anger was burning. "And your paycheck? Did you get paid the past few weeks?" The question dropped like a stone into a still lake. Jesse looked down. One of his arms hung limp by his side. No response. None was needed. Jesse's silence was the most painful answer. Michael noticed Jesse hiding his right hand beneath his apron. A moment later, Jesse quietly pulled from his pocket a crumpled leave of absence form stamped denied. It was wrinkled, but the message was still legible. No sick leave entitlement. Must complete 30 standard workdays. Notice already given. The corner of the form was smudged, unclear whether from dishwater or tears. Jesse struggled to speak. I know I shouldn't cry. But this morning I got the surgery confirmation. If I don't get time off, the doctor won't hold the date. He paused, took a deep breath, then shook his head. What Michael saw in that gesture wasn't acceptance, but a verdict on how loyalty had been taken for granted.
Sandra, still at a distance, stood behind the cashier counter.
She was laughing with an elderly guest as if nothing had ever happened. In Jesse's hand, still holding a white envelope. Last month's paycheck. Unopened. Stamped in red on the outside on hold pending audit.
Kara glanced toward them, her eyes briefly filled with worry, then lowered her head and quietly poured coffee, pretending she hadn't seen anything.
Why is his paycheck being held? Who's deciding Jesse's fate? Michael didn't say another word.
But as he turned around, his face had changed. A slight frown. A crease at the corner of his eye. A stare as cold as the glass on a freezer door.
He was stepping out of the role of just a customer. And with every step, he was returning to being Michael Foster, founder of Sunrise Cafe. Michael stood upright, hand resting on the table, his gaze calm yet heavy with a force no one in that diner had ever witnessed. He removed his glasses. Heads turned. Sandra, the shift manager, was walking behind the counter order checklist in hand. She froze. I'm Michael Foster, he said, voice low but each word firm. CEO and founder of the Sunrise Cafe chain. The sentence shattered the atmosphere that had lingered between sizzling eggs and clinking silverware. Customers turned. Staff held their breath. Sandra stood still. She said nothing. Couldn't. Michael calmly pulled out his phone and opened a PDF document read marked at the header franchise agreement regulation no. 14 Section 2.2, no franchise unit may delay payroll, withhold tips, or obstruct medical leave. Any violations, including those by franchise partners, will be handled directly by the executive board. He looked up and stared directly at Sandra. Would you like me to read the penalty clause too? Jesse the cook remained motionless behind the grill. His hand gripped the edge of the counter as if to keep from collapsing. Kara raised her hand to her mouth. Sandra opened her lips to speak, but Michael raised his hand first. From the back door, a regional supervisor, a man in a gray suit, stepped in, silently placed a tablet on the nearest table. The screen lit up. The first image, a familiar scene, the storage cabinet in the kitchen corner. Sandra, wearing the same outfit as today, seen bending down, removing an envelope marked with Jesse's name, stuffing it into a private drawer. Locking it. Looking around. Then walking away. Cut to the next scene. A time card log appeared. Jesse's clock-out time altered by hand in blue ink. Then a faint audio clip until we clarify that extra shift you're not getting paid. Take it or leave it.
Sandra's voice.
Unmistakable. The air in the diner thickened. An older man near the entrance put down his coffee cup, shaking his head. A young employee whispered to her shift partner, "It's true, everything Jesse said is true." Michael remained composed, but his eyes were no longer those of a customer. They were the eyes of the man who built this system, now standing face to face with the very thing he had vowed would never happen under his name. Sandra, you didn't just violate franchise policy. You violated the trust of your workers. You turned a place meant for hope into a place where people break down crying, even while scrubbing pans. Sandra opened her mouth about to explain, but the regional supervisor raised a hand. All statements should be made before the review board. And you will receive formal notice of the investigation within 24 hours. Jesse, still standing, finally spoke. I just want to work to be paid fairly and not have to lie to my son that I'm okay. Michael looked at him, not with pity, but with respect. And from today on, you won't have to lie anymore. The CEO didn't just uncover a violation, he confronted it right there in the middle of the diner in front of all the employees and customers. The evidence was undeniable. Tension surged, but so did the audience's satisfaction. Three emotional drops hit back-to-back the action, the evidence, and finally Jesse's truth, leaving viewers not just witnessing a system's reckoning, but the liberation of a human soul.
A moment of silence.
No more words from Sandra. No one stood by her anymore. Even the co-workers who once avoided Jesse now looked at him differently. Michael turned, walked slowly toward Jesse, who was still standing in the kitchen corner, his hands gripping his apron, shaking. He gently placed a hand on Jesse's shoulder. You'll receive all your withheld wages along with 3 months of additional health coverage. Jesse looked up. His eyes were red. But this time, the tears weren't from helplessness. They were the tears of a man who had just reclaimed his dignity. Michael continued. His voice was low but filled with resolve. Starting next week, you'll have the right to take time off to care for your son, and your salary will remain intact. Family is a part of life, not something you should have to sacrifice to keep your job. Kara, the young waitress, stepped forward and hugged Jesse tightly from behind. A dishwashing staffer quietly approached and placed on the table a worn-out card Jesse had once left behind. The corner was frayed. Handwritten words, "Don't hesitate to ask. I'm here to help." The room didn't erupt in cheers. It swelled with something deeper, the stirring of hearts. Michael turned to the entire team, his eyes passed over each of them, as if offering silent thanks for what they had endured, for what they had spoken up about, for standing together when it mattered most. "I came here to inspect the system," he said. "But it was all of you, with your silence, with your tears behind the grill, with your perseverance in serving guests each day, who reminded me of one truth: the system, if it doesn't protect people, is meaningless." Michael turned toward Sandra, who could barely remain standing now. The regional supervisor gently signaled, "Sandra Williams, you are hereby suspended. The internal investigation begins today. No yelling. No drama. Just the chilling clarity of justice." Michael held up a new document, an updated franchise policy. He raised it for all to see. All franchise partners will re-sign with clear terms on timekeeping, payroll, and medical leave. Anyone who violates them will no longer operate under the Sunrise name. The diner seemed to hold its breath. Michael nodded, walked slowly away from the kitchen, then turned back. His eyes locked on Jesse. "You're not just a great chef. You're the reason we exist." Michael paused for a moment by the front door before leaving. Morning sunlight streamed through the smudged window, landing on the table where he had sat earlier that day. Jesse, still in the kitchen, was no longer holding a pan.
He was clutching his phone.
He heard the news. "The doctor says the surgery can go ahead as planned. I want him to know his dad isn't helpless anymore." His voice wavered but didn't break. Michael turned back to look at the diner, a space that once seemed warm, filled with laughter and the clang of pans. But now he knew behind those familiar sounds there might be a sigh or a sob swallowed by someone silently enduring. Calf might serve hundreds of people a day, but a true system is one that listens even to the quietest sob from the back kitchen. From the very first second, the audience is pulled in by a deeply emotional image. Why did the chef break down crying mid-shift? They can't look away, not until they've discovered the full reason behind it. The ending is not just the resolution. It's where everything is reborn. Don't leave before the CEO confronts the truth and rebuilds everything. That feeling of witnessing justice being served touches something primal in every viewer. The one who suffered doesn't just receive an apology, they are protected, supported, and publicly recognized. Jesse stepped out the door. For the first time in months, he lifted his head, sunlight falling onto a face lined with wrinkles and dry from tears. Michael turned to him. "You don't have to suffer in silence anymore. We can't fix everything, but we can start with one person." A system's success can't be measured by the number of dishes it sells, but by the number of people who can go home with peace in their heart because they know they're no longer invisible. A coffee empire, if it's built on trembling shoulders, will never stand strong.